10 to 2, it won't take that long. Nobody wants to come back and listen to lectures after lunch. So I'll try to get the good stuff to you early, and then if you want to come back to lunch and ask questions, we can talk. But we'll talk about nutrition first, really as it pertains to the dough and how that pertains to reproduction success. We're going to talk about a little bit about reproduction management, and then I have a quick talk on antibiotics, just some stuff y'all can take back home and look over and use and talk with your owners, pin managers, and interns. So we'll go ahead and get started with a little bit about nutrition. That's my contact info. I think it's on the, we should have the slides. And so that's my personal cell. The AccuVet15 is my email that I check the most. So if you need to get a hold of me, that's one that I would use. Just a little bit about me. I was born here in Texas. My dad is an Army veteran, so we moved all over the place, but we're four different times. So I was born in Texas. My mom and dad still live here, and that's kind of the closest thing I've had to home. I went to Texas A&M from 11 to 15, finished that school in 15, and then went to work for Transover Genetics, which is a capital company. And then in 2017, Dr. Greg called me and said he was ready to retire, and so I was able to buy into the practice and start working towards taking that over as he worked his way out of the practice. And yeah, we're based on in Tulsa. That's my wife Ellen and our son Gabriel. So they're not here this weekend. She's taking care of the baby back home. But that's what the home life looks like. We'll start off talking about the dough and really what her job is and how we can maximize her job without we take care of her. And so when you think about what we're asking the dough to do, we're asking her to give us the appropriate number of fawns. You know, we'd all love to have twins on the average every year. Well, placentation type is just how that baby communicates with the mom inside the belly. And that's a little bit specific or interesting when we talk about animals because it's different than humans, and we want to make sure that we prime that baby for as much success as possible. The microbiome, which is just a fancy word for gut health, again, that's going to be specific to that animal, but we can really tweak it or maximize it for efficiency and success. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we can optimize the quality and quantity of colostrum, all food feeding and nutrition. So this is just a little table about the different aspects of nutrition and how they can affect the dough. So we have minerals and vitamins, fat, or obesity, malnutrition, and protein. There's a lot of stuff out there, but I pulled what I think is really important to us when it comes down to reproduction success. And so you can see that if we have vitamin and mineral deficiencies, we're going to have fetal loss, we're going to have a lower growth rate, poor joint bonds, singles versus twins on average. Obesity, a lot of people think that more is better, and so if we have over-conditioned does as we come into the breeding season, that's going to have a negative impact on us. And then malnutrition, you can just imagine what it would be. And protein also, I think a lot of times we equate the higher protein feed with being a better feed overall, and that's not necessarily false, but it's always not necessarily the best thing for the animal. So high protein at the time of AI can be detrimental to reproduction success. We'll get into that a little bit later. I put this chart up here. I don't know if you can see it from the screen, but it's on your slides. This is just an energy chart depicting on energy levels that dough needs based on various times of the year. So we have maintenance, early flushing before the breeding. We have early gestation, late gestation, early lactation, and late lactation. And so you can see that right now, in the summer, we're leaving late lactation, and we're about to start transitioning into this maintenance and flushing period as AI season gets closer. And that flushing period, we call it a nutritional flush. It's just giving an extra boost of energy in the form of fat to these does, really to tell their mind that, hey, forage and nutrition is plentiful. We can go ahead and make babies this year, and maybe we can make two because there's plenty of food out there for us to eat. And then we drop back down into this early gestation. And so if you're looking at a spreadsheet and trying to count dollars and where the money's going, you can see that over the winter, early pregnancy, those does don't need really much more nutrition or energy levels than what they need when they don't have any fawns at all. So you can really back the feed off for the first trimester and save some money on your feed costs and not do any harm to your animals. And then once we go over into late gestation and early lactation, you can see that that's obviously the highest energy demand. So we're asking that doe to take care of herself, we're asking her to grow a baby, or we're asking her to feed a baby. And so there's a lot of energy requirements.
In life lactation period,
Yes, sir.
how do you recommend feeding to keep the food and get ready to start to grind them off late on?
So, late lactation, I like a moderate level of protein and a moderate level of fat. So it doesn't matter what feed you're on, but roughly like a 16.4 or something, 16.6, and then slowly start to work the fat off. I think that one kind of like a 16.4 in late gestation, so they still got protein to put in the milk for the baby, but that fat energy level isn't there, and so they start to drive it a little bit. And then once we turn that corner, there's nutritional rush. A lot of those guys on their next load of feed will go back up in the fat fraction once they pull the babies off. So I really, from peak lactation to late lactation, if you're going to get a new truckload of feed, I have the guys try to back off on the fat content as we get towards the end of gestation. This is just a graph depiction of what the year looks like for these doe, and I've broken it down by here's breeding day and then here's spawning day. This is just a good rubbage. See, a lot of times out there you can just maintain these doe on a good quality feed, and then obviously as we get towards spawns you can bump it up to like a horse quality alfalfa, if you will. Minerals, I'm a big believer in minerals in any way that you get it to them, whether it's injectable, whether it's loose, or whether it's a mineral pack in your feed. And then right here is your protein level. So you can see for the doe, I don't think that you really ever need to go above a 16% protein, and a lot of times I think you can maintain these girls on a 13%, but that's just kind of a way to look at the breeding year as a whole and how we can feed them. And really it's all about the better we take care of these girls and understand that they don't need the same amount of feed every day of the year, and the better we watch that, it's also going to affect your profit loss on your margins too. So go back to more is always better, right? And that's not the case. I know that there's like a 16.8 feed out there right now, and that's a great feed product when you use it appropriately. But I've seen guys on that 16.8, and I go look at the doe in the summertime, and they're fat right now. And it's going to be really hard for them to increase their nutrition stores for AI if they're already fat right now. And if you think about my experience before here with a cow, like you watch a cow or she raises a calf, like her body weight fluctuates, and it's supposed to. She's supposed to be fleshy before she calves. She calves out, she's nursing that baby, she loses a little bit of weight, you wean the baby, and she starts to put weight back on. That's just how it's designed, that's what the hormones are supposed to do. But fat releases molecules that interact with estrogen. And so if you think about that interference, if you have a really overproduced female, it can get in the way of what we're trying to do when we're spending a bunch of money on AI, a bunch of money on semen, and trying to get the best bang for our buck when it comes to AI. So I try to tell people to look at your deer and manage their body condition. So if you think about the energy demands on a doe that lost her twins, or she didn't have any babies, or she lost her babies early, and then you look at like a yearling who may have had twins, or an older mature doe. All of those does have different energy requirements. That yearling doe that's raising twins is still trying to grow herself. She's trying to get back in shape for breeding season, and she's trying to raise babies. Versus that mature doe that lost her fawns at birth, she has nothing to do as far as to take care of herself. So they shouldn't be fed the same if we're really trying to get a maximized efficiency out of nutrition. And so this is a graph that I made trying to illustrate the point that it's not the amount of fat that we're feeding at the moment, it's a picture of that graph. And so imagine if our brain can only look at the level of fat that they're seeing at any given time. And so if we did that, say we don't have any fat in our diet, we'll get this bottom line. The brain doesn't see any fat cells, and so it's just a flat line from late lactation all the way to AI. Or say we're on that 1680 high fat protein feed for the full year. As far as season a level of fat, does it make sense that the shape of the line is still the same? Even though it's higher, it's still pretty much a flat line because there's no variation. What we want is right here, where we have a low to moderate fat, during the lactation or lean, say a 4% fat. And then once we lean, and we're getting ready for the AI season, we bump up that fat to like 6 or 8%. And now the brain sees a change. And it's that shape and that change in the fat level that's going to tell the ovaries that you can release multiple eggs because we got plenty of nutrition to raise those babies. And so it's not necessarily the quality of the feed or how much or how good they look, but it's the shape of this graph that we want to see. And that means that we have to feed them different from the summer and then push them on a higher blend fat whenever we're coming into the breeding season. And so this is also just a decrease. What we're seeing when we feed too much protein. If you think about proteins, they're made up of amino acids. I don't know if anyone works out or drinks energy drinks, but they're always loaded with BCAAs. That's branched chain amino acids. That's the building block of protein. And so, by the nature of the name, amino acids are acidic. And the body doesn't have the ability to store excess protein, so the only thing that it can do is excrete it. And it's excreted through urine, through feces. In the case of a female, it's excreted through urine secretions. And so anytime we have an excess protein, specifically around breeding time, it's going to change the uterine pH, and that altered uterine environment can affect pregnancy results. And so high protein when the babies are coming because they need to grow and they need milk, but we need a lower protein level when we're coming toward the egg. And I know that it sounds like you're changing a lot, but really if you just stay at about 14% protein in the middle, you don't have to much of it here. But too much fat can be a problem, too much protein can be a problem, and the better we are to stay in balance, the better we're going to be when it comes to AI success. So I talked about this earlier, but you just got to look at the gear and think about what their job is in that gear and how old they are. So she needs a lot of energy. I think the 2-year-old is the hardest animal on your farm to get pregnant. Even harder than a yearling, because that yearling is still growing, but she's not being asked to raise a baby yet. And so her energy demands aren't as high as a 2-year-old. They're still growing a little bit. Just got that baby that now has to recondition herself to get pregnant. Because production is a luxury. If something else is off, then that's the first thing that goes into success. Donors and recipients, you can manage those differently based on what you're asking to do, and then singles versus multiples, just thinking about the energy. If each one of those fawns is its own energy drain, obviously a girl that has more of those is going to have a higher energy requirement. And so this is just kind of wrapping up everything, overarching view of what I think is important and when to do it. So every day is pre-fawning, when we're in March and April, kick up that protein. That protein is going to go to help your quality of colostrum, it's going to go to fetal growth, it's going to go to milk protein. And so when we're coming up on fawning season, find a way to get extra protein, whether it's get a better quality day, get them to eat more feed, which is hard because that rumen is so small because the uterus takes up so much space in their abdomen. You really have to focus on, we call it caloric density. But find a way to get more protein to them pre-fawning. Early lactation and late lactation, they're going to be losing weight they should be, but still on good feed. And then once we wean and we're going through the AI process, we want to increase the fat content, not the protein. And you'll see, I had a guy last year, the first year that we worked for him, and he was asking me about nutrition, and I said, what are you eating right now? And this was in July, and he said, they're on a high-fat ration. And I said, get them off of it. And he got nervous. And I said, hey, I want to get to work for you next year, but I do good this year. I'm not trying to give you bad advice. And I said, pull them off the fat until you lean. And he did. And then he weaned it. The next truckload, he went back up to high fat feed. And he had a really good year. We get to work with him again this year. Said that he had the most babies on the ground that he's had in a while. And so he could do quite a bit of it. And his AI rate didn't change very much, but he had more twins. And so that's what you might not affect the correct rate, but you're going to get more. Your bonds per doe are going to go up if you do that. Mineral supplements, I think that it's something that we don't talk about a lot, but it's really important. And if you think about the deer industry, we're probably the only intensely managed livestock If minerals are only included in your feed, then the only way that those does can get access to good minerals if you're feeding them. But late winter, I got a lot of clients that don't feed anymore. They don't quality egg, but they have a mineral out. So this is multi-min. I don't have any ties or relations with multi-min, but I think it's a good product. And then I recommend people give multi-min to their dough at weaning, and then again at Cedar Inn, and pre-farming if they work them. And it's just a guarantee that they get some added minerals. And if you look at these studies, these are cattle studies, but you can see the impact that injectable mineral had. And it doesn't have to be the multi-min product. There's a lot of, but this is just what the data was, and so it's not in this slides. I had this last night. But multi-min is manganese, copper, selenium, and again, my recommendation, anytime you're handling your dough, whether it be a weaning or a Cedar Inn or pre-flying, if you're selling them, I would give them an injectable mineral, and I think that you can see pretty good results. So they got 75% versus 55%, and I don't know how big these studies were, but I use this in my cows, and so I don't recommend stuff to people that I don't use myself, but I do like this product. The only thing it doesn't have is vitamin E, which is really important for reproduction too, and so I tell my clients when we're coming up, multi-min and a vitamin E shot. You can get vitamin E it's usually a vitamin A and E at your feed store. Get that when you wean, and then again in Cedar Inn, and I think that you can see some. Again, even if your birth rate changes a percent or two, but if you get more, I have a slide that shows that if you get more fawns per dough, that adds up a lot when you look at your profit margins at the end of the year. This is another multi-min study. I don't know if it shows up very well, but what they did was they gave multi-min at the time of vaccination in calves, and then the control group did it, all got vaccinated. And if you can see here, if these cattle are blue, that means that they had more than a 4-time antibody response to the vaccine, and if they're red, then they did it. So half of this group right here had more than a 4-time increase in antibodies. And this one was almost the entire group. So you can see that when they gave multi-min at the time of vaccination, they got a tremendous response in the antibody levels of their calf. And again, there's multiple products. Multi-min just has the most published data. My only point is, I think trace minerals are important. I don't care how you get them into your gear, but I think you should investigate getting them into your gear, and injectables are a pretty easy way to go. So that's something that I recommend to clients. Again, no affiliation with multi-min, it's a good product. This is just a tag from a loose mineral. There's a lot of ways you can do it. Come fawning time, I have a lot of clients that buy a loose mineral. It can be Vitaferm or even something from your feed store, but they'll buy a little bit of concrete mixer, and then I can script in my Bogatec or Coccidiostat, and you can mix it in that loose mineral and have it out of your pins. Because if you have Bogatec or any kind of medication in your dough feed, but your target is your fawns, those fawns can't basically eat enough of that feed to get the therapeutic dose or whatever kind of medicine is in your feed. So we can mix that at a high concentration in your loose mineral, and then those dough and those fawns can go with that mineral and get it. So I talked about a little bit of Bogatec, Coccidia drug. At the time of fawning, mixed in was a really effective way of getting Coccidia stems to the fawns too. And so that even there's no also don't think that it's wrong to feed a mineral that doesn't have the chelated sulfate. So, as far as making a recommendation, I haven't seen a big enough reason why I do it. I just want people to have something out there for the year. Can you live longer without food or without water? Right. So which makes water more important, because we can't live as long without it. So I don't think we talk enough about water, especially when it comes to fawns. A lot of people think that the only liquid nutrition that fawns need is from milk, but really fawns need a lot of water too. And they're not going to start eating roughage and grain like we wanted to until they can get access to water as well. So these are irrigated areas because they're low. A lot of those higher troughs, those fawns can't walk up to it and drink out of them. And so these are kind of a pain because you got to clean them more, but making sure that we have low water access to your fawns is really, really, really going to help your fawn survival. I went to a guy's place, cattle died, and a bunch of his calves were dying. And I walked through, he had impeccable facilities, 5-row pipe fence, and all of his corrals, concrete water troughs or automatic waters. But every single one of the waters was about this high, which is great for his cows. But those calves couldn't get up there and push the ball down with their nose, and so his calves were really dying. And we made some adjustments, and he got some water where those calves could have access to, and just having easier accessible water for his calves dramatically increased the livability in his calves. So water is important, and it's certainly important in fawns. And I think that sometimes that gets overlooked because they're addicted to their drinking milk from the mom and they don't use it. But they do need good water. And just finding a way to be able to get it. So these are really cool. That's a flow valve. I don't know if y'all seen those. But that way your trough doesn't have to be level with one of those automatic waters and valves in the bottom of the tank. It kind of looks like a toilet float almost. And that way you don't have to have a perfectly level pad for your water. So we'll transition into the microbiome or just overall gut health. And so there's two critical events when the fawn is born. When the fawn is born, its gut is basically sterile. And so we have to inoculate that gut with good bacteria. And we need that fawn to absorb as much colostrum as it physically can in the first 24 hours of life. And so we don't do a lot of C-sections in the deer, thankfully. It's really nice how Mother Nature designed those fawns to go through the birth canal, because when they do, they cough up and swallow stuff, and now all this goes into the belly. And that's the first way that those fawns get inoculated in their gut, is through the bacteria, the good bacteria that it comes in contact with the birth canal. And then they'll pick up bacteria from nursing on the mom's teeth, from the ground, which is why we'll talk a lot about cleanliness or clean environment when those fawns are being born. And so those are things that we need to think about. And if you read the research, this is totally related stuff, but it seems like, I don't know if y'all have horses, but they say like everything in the horse goes back to the foot. Like if something goes wrong with the horse, you're going to end up seeing it with the foot down the road. And now they're finding out in humans and livestock and anything, the gut is the source of a tremendous amount of good things that we benefit from when it comes to the immune system. So these are just cases about people with gut health, high fiber diets, and a low impact on COVID infection rates. And for gut health, these people were on a low fiber diet, and they have what they call leaky gut syndrome, which I think we see in the livestock industry. But there's a higher level of COVID infection in those people. So obviously not a mere paper, but it just goes to show you how much research and thought there is now into this microbiome and overall gut health. And I think that we don't feed enough hay in the feed industry or in the deer industry, and we have readily accessible, high quality feeds, and it's easy to put cell feeders out there. But I think that a lot of these deer could use a lot more forage and roughage in their life, and so I think that a lot of these deer are on the borderline of acidosis, just because of the way that we manage them, and so. I think that you don't have to change anything with the amount of feed you feed, but have more access for hay. And I think that you can see quite a bit of difference in your gut health. Dr. Stanley Wright Brown wrote this, always says healthy rumen, healthy deer. so just paying attention to overall gut health and rumen development. If you think about what we're asking a fawn to do, they've got to nurse that milk, and then in about a 4-month period, they have to, when they're born, they'll have one stomach just like us. And by the time we wean them, we're asking them to develop. They have those 3 stomachs, but they're not developed yet. And so by the time we wean them, we're asking them to have 4 stomachs. And it's our job to be able to manage them appropriately to help that process. And a lot of times the reason that we have such a tremendous amount of sickness and death after weaning, I haven't talked to all of you about your farm, but my guess is that we have a high degree of sickness and death in your first month of your farm's life, and then right after weaning. And there's 2 reasons for that. Weaning, first off, it's a stressful event, and stress lowers immunity. And secondly, I think we have a gut health problem because not all of these deer have developed a fully functional rumen, and we're pulling away from mom. And then we're asking them to learn how to digest a new type of feed that they may not be as familiar with as they should be. And so that can lead to a lot of problems. And so we'll talk about how we can help those. Colostrum is how a doe gives her immunity to a baby. Humans, we have a different type of placentation, and so colostrum isn't, we get antibodies. I got antibodies from my mom directly through the uterus. Colostrum wasn't an issue for me because I already had her immunity from inside the womb. We don't have that luxury in ruminants, and so they have to take that first milk in that first 24 hours of life to be able to get that immunity and those antibodies that we want them to get. And so the biggest take-home message for this is first 4 to 12 hours. The biggest thing that I talk to my clients about is how can we increase that quantity of colostrum and how do we increase the quality. And this goes back to understanding, looking at different age groups and being able to manage your deer differently. So if you think about, Jason, say you just moved the doe onto your place this year. It's a new environment. She hasn't lived there very long. She hasn't had time to build up her own immunity to the stuff that's specific to your farm versus a 10-year-old doe that was born there. And so you think about the quality of her colostrum specifically for your farm, it's going to be very different based on how long those animals. Same with a young animal. A yearling doe doesn't have a robust immune system as a 6-year-old doe. And so being able to understand that, I would guess if you could plot out on a spreadsheet the fawns that you had the most trouble with this year as far as treating and sickness, it's going to be heavily skewed towards does out of your fawns out of your younger doe. And so part of that is just because the law of nature, those younger doe don't have as good of colostrum as an older doe. And so anything we can do to increase that quality and that colostrum and the quantity of colostrum is going to be really important. The biggest thing we can do is increasing that protein pre-fawning. That's going to really increase the quality of the colostrum, quality and quantity of your colostrum. And then Ovotec is also proven to increase the quality and quantity of your colostrum. So that's why I have those people using a loose mineral mixed in that concrete with Ovotec pre-fawning. So those does really get, and it's going to help the colostrum. It's also going to help your coccidia shedding. And then those fawns also have access to it too. Just some little things to think about. If colostrum gets progressively better and better the closer we get to fawning, if a doe has quads and fawns early, she's taking a week or 10 days off of colostrum production. So that's another reason that those babies are off to a rough start, is just because mom didn't go full term. She doesn't have, a lot can happen as far as quality of colostrum in those last 10 days. So if you have freebies, just remember that they're not going to have access to the highest colostrum quality as you would like. Maybe you can supplement them with usually low colostrum or sheep colostrum, but litter size, mom has only got a certain amount of colostrum, so if you got trips or quads, just thinking about robbing or some of those, they're not going to get as much as a single with sucking mom by itself. So just things to think about. Those things really aren't in our control. But if we've done a good job eating protein, if we've got Bogatec out there for the dough, those are all little things that we can do to help our farms whenever they get on the ground. And then this is a really cool trick. If you're in the unfortunate situation that a doe does die during labor or right before, you can milk her out and you can express that, put it in a Ziploc bag and freeze it. And then if you have to pull a baby in the first 24 hours, you can thaw that colostrum and you can give it to those. You can also buy artificial colostrum, but I'm a big believer in bugs that live on your farm or problems on your farm, and if you can protect against those, then you really yourself a good favor. It's just a little comparison, and I'm going to put that on there because I like to show people this picture. Whales, if you look at the fat content in a whale, it's 74% fat in a whale, and so whales actually excrete their hormones into the ocean, and then the cat swims up and just engulfs it instead of actually nursing. But the only way that works is because it's like pudding. But I just think that's kind of fascinating if you think about the way God designed stuff and how different animals survive. Just finishing up, this was moving from ruminant to pre-ruminant to ruminant. Nothing overly complicated here. I think it's something that we talk a lot about, especially in the cattle background, sheep and goats. But the goal is to get those fawns eating feed and roughage as fast as possible. And so that just means being able to have access to them. Ruminants have 4 stomachs, 2 forestomachs, and then an apple mason, or a mason and an apple mason is like our stomach. So they have 3 different stomach compartments before they get to the true stomach. If I eat a Snickers, that goes to my stomach and it's readily absorbed on my small intestine. It's just the way that it was. But when we feed stuff to ruminants, the rumen breaks it down and distributes it into ways that the body can absorb it. And so we have to feed the rumen, but we have to make the rumen before we can feed it. And so the biggest way to do that is getting stuff into their belly as early as possible. So this is, again, a calf study, but that's just because people aren't ready to do this kind of research on here. But if you look at it, this was a weaned calf that only had milk, didn't have access to feed or hay when it was weaned. This milk, and you can see that this is essentially smooth. That should look like carpet in a full functioning room. So if you're on the left, it's smooth. If you look on the right, you can notice a little bit more texture to the wall of the room, but there's not much. This one had access to milk and hay. And then if you look over here, this is a weaned animal that already has pretty good pillar development on the wall of the room because it had access to milk and drink as it was growing. So if you think about the transition of a weaned animal, if you have 2 animals weaned at the same time, one in the room looks like this and the other one looks like this, it's a lot easier to transition for that one that's already a step ahead of the other one. So the easiest way to do that are these creek panels. You can put them underneath your feeders so that only the fawns can get in there so that your doe aren't eating anything that you're trying to give them. You can put those creeper panels in the corner of the pen and put a bale of hay back there that only the fawns can get to so that the doe aren't eating all of the fawns. But it is tricky trying to get stuff that's readily accessible only to the fawns, otherwise the doe are going to eat before the fawns can. But I've had guys that go to these to the bottom of their feeders and they can just put some hay in there, some pellets, and let those fawns get in there and eat it. But anything you can do to get stuff in the belly of your fawns as early as possible is beneficial in the long run. That's about it for that. That's pretty much all I have on nutrition. There's some stuff in there that we'll go over, but those are the high points. Any questions on nutrition? We'll go through real quick because it's not a long lecture. I think everyone's interested in repro. And then we'll take a quick break and then we'll finish up with antibiotics and try to get you out of here before lunch. I think it's the black and white.
Food area.
Yes, sir.
We're on the ranches, we're on rural water, and the past couple of weeks, you can smell the water, it smells like bleach. And that same water that we drink, like, it's over the there.
Yeah,
When I first got into business, we had water troughs, we had mold growing in there. I was gonna take bleach, scrub brush, clean out the water. And somebody said, don't you dare do that, you kill the bacteria in the river and it'll kill your deer.
yeah, you do have to be careful anytime you introduce something into their gut, because if it's going to kill something in the crop, it can. If you clean it and scrub it, rinse it out really well, that's obviously not a problem. But yeah, water source is a big deal, especially down in South Texas. I got some guys that we did salt analysis or water analysis on some of their, we spread their deer. They were on good feed, but their skin was real dry, the hair was brittle. It didn't match what they should have looked like based on what kind of nutrition they were being offered. But we ran a water analysis, and I mean, they were basically drinking salt water from the well that they were tapped into. And so it's a little bit of money up front. They put a reverse osmosis system in to be able to filter water before it went to the pins. But you think about how many dead lawns does it, that filter system pays for itself pretty quickly when you figure about. I mean, you say 4 or 5 shooters, and you've got the nicest water system that you could ever ask for. So, yeah, water quality, which is really just a reflection of the water source, is a big deal, and it's very geographically dependent.
So the water system, osmosis system.
It doesn't have to be reverse osmosis, but some kind of filtration system before that water gets to the pins would be really helpful. And so, yeah, it's an upfront expense, but you save a couple of years a year, that thing pays for itself.
We have a law that hardly any law. Well, 8 law, one got irritating.
You can run an analysis on it and see what it says, and it may have been a periodic thing. We had a water line break at our place, or on our line in Tulsa, and the water smelled really weird for a couple of days because they were trying to flush the system out. But you can take samples, quarterly or something, and see it and make sure that nothing's changed. That's what people to do that if they have a suspicion, and they can just have a rolling database for their water analysis. Talk a little bit about Repro. Nothing super in depth, but it's really, again, how I look at the year and what I try to communicate to my clients about what they can do. This is the same graph for this one. Again, if you see the on my tractor, we're talking about cycles, we're talking about ups and downs, we're talking about different jobs throughout the year that we're asking engineers to do. And so we're talking about Repro, and the longer you do it, the more routine it becomes. That doesn't mean it's easy. It's actually really complex. And there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of changing parts, and you can have the most control possible, but comes down to AI, maybe like bad semen, and it can just cause a problem. And it's just really complex. It's always evolving. There's a lot of different people that are involved, and it requires a lot of intense training and experience. And a lot of people think that I put that up there just to talk about your technician until you're working with them. That's about the managers too. Everybody remembers the first year of the AI, and then you can see the progress that you get going further along in there. But it requires a lot of training and experience. And so we get there on AI day, and it's really just, I look at it like the Olympics. The Olympics are in 4 years, but this is just one day here. But it's everything we've done that whole year just comes down to that one AI day. There's no 16-game season playoffs. It's just you just get one shot. And so it's a culmination of being the practitioner, overall herd health, which is what what you guys are doing on the farm and the healthy breed year, and then the genetic material that we're going to be using that day, be it semen or embryos, and the quality of those. And so it's a partnership. I think that the more that we talk on the phone, the more we communicate and troubleshoot, the better our chance is going to be that one day of having a successful thing. And I always say the more variables we control, the more successful that we'll be. And that's one reason that our team was running the trailer, just because when we go set up at a place, it's the same setup every time. Everything has its exact place of order. And just the more variables that we can control on my side, on your side, the better off we're going to be. And so I think about the breeding year, really it's 5 different seasons. So right now we're in summer. Bucks are pushing out, getting ready to wean fawns. We're thinking about AI season. We're looking at bucks and velvet, trying to figure out what we want to do. Then we move into that pre-breeding season, which to me is really starts at weaning. And then we have our breeding week, or weeks, depending on how big your operation is. We have a post-breeding period, which I call December to March probably. And then we have our fawning or our calving season. And so each of those 5 different seasons, I think that there's different things we can do to maximize the effect and success of our AI season. And so summer breeding season, or summer tail breeding season is really fun if you're just looking at bucks on Facebook, you're going to conventions. And so if you're thinking about semen, what you're going to use, start lining it up, you're getting on schedule with your veterinarian for your AI program. When you're going to breed this year, pretty geographically similar every year. Some people want to try to move it up, but I'd be careful moving it up because you're putting more stress and more demand on that doe to get back into good flesh after you wean her. So I like to wean fawns at least 30 days. I'm not saying you can't push it. I got guys that wean when they put feeders in. But in general, I think it's nice to get those fawns off 30 days before AI. And then I try to get people to make breeding groups at weaning at the least. So I'd like for y'all to already have breeding groups like in the spring when you're fawning. But I know that that's not always possible. But right now in the summer, when you're about to wean, I'd like you to make breeding groups then at the latest. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So we talk about semen. I know that there's a lot of semen transactions that go on at these conferences. A lot of semen's on pre-order, on Facebook. So really, anymore, I think a lot of semen selection is based off of what we see on Facebook and how bucks look over the summer. That's not a bad thing. I think that should just be part of everything, though. And some people want to use new stuff that hasn't been proven. Some people only use the old stuff that's proven, but they say that might not have as much value if you're trying to put stuff like marketed because it's an older genetics. But there's just so many moving parts. But semen's not all equal, and unfortunately for us, in the deer industry, there's no quality standards. And so, which is crazy to me because there's not a more expensive straw semen in any livestock industry than in the whitetail industry. The best bulls in the country, Angus bulls, is a $50 straw semen. And that's highly standardized. But then you go to the whitetail industry and, I don't know what stuff's going on, straw Southern Express or last year, really crazy money for semen, there's zero standards. So we all think that a good straw should have about 50 million cells in it, but that's not regulated either. And you got a lot of semen that's sold in the summer while bucks and velvet that has to be used in November. They collect them in October and it doesn't go to straw order. So it doesn't happen all the time, but it's really easy to think that the semen can be diluted down a little bit because they want it to be, they got a quota to make sense. I'm not talking ill about anyone, just take the facts, that's just what we see. So, bucks should be collected either in season or post-rut. The best quality collections come December and January after the bucks have been used and they're not as stressed out as they were before. When they're in rut, they have what they call a gel fraction, which really affects the quality of the freezing. And so I think the December and January collections are the best quality. The only downside of that is you didn't get to use it the year before. If you really freeze species than previous. But you want to make sure it's done by a good technician, handled appropriately, and hasn't been handled since it's been frozen a lot. If you think about every time you take a can of semen out of a nitrogen tank and pass it to another tank, there's a chance that damage could have been done during that transition, depending on how quickly or not quickly it was performed. And then semen should start the post-thaw evaluation, just so you know what you're looking at. It's just a cartoon of a nitrogen tank. Liquid nitrogen itself is negative 196 degrees Celsius. So dry ice is negative 85 degrees C. So we know that after anything that's warmer than negative 85 degrees Celsius, that semen is starting to thaw just slightly, but enough to do damage. And if you can see on this, negative 85 is right in the middle of this neck. So anytime you bring semen up above this line, you risk doing damage to that semen. And so I've gone places and guys go in and unload the semen and pull the straw and wipe off the straw so that they can try to read it. It's just, if you think about how many cells are touching the line of that straw because they're microscopic, there's a lot of cells that are damaged in that process. And so, just a little bit, thinking about when you're handling semen, how to be careful. And why does it matter? Well, if you damage some of those cells that are still alive, what you damage is actually the nucleus or the DNA of that sperm cell. So when it fertilizes an egg, you can make a pregnancy, but it might not be a healthy pregnancy. And the biggest thing we see is that they'll get pregnant at AI, they'll carry a pregnancy for 30 or 40 days, and then they'll absorb that pregnancy because there's something wrong with it, and then they're cycling back in January, which puts you at August spawns. And so it doesn't always mean that they didn't get pregnant in AI. A lot of times we have microabsorption between 30 and 40 days of the pregnancy, and then they're going to cycle back in January, and which puts them out of labor on. So just things to think about when you have damaged semen from being handled poorly or too many times. So we look at a balanced approach to semen selection. I'm not telling people how to make their mating decisions, but this is just what I see. In the traditional livestock model, you have appearance, production, and performance. And then in the whitetail industry, we have appearance for sure, pedigree, and then livability would be a good option, in my opinion, to look at. I don't know if we talked about that enough, but I think that we should. And then certainly now that we have some of these markers for CWD coming out, we have Dr. Seabury's genetic testing is going to come on, and I think that will start to make an influence in how we do our breeding selections. But really, the whitetail deer model is its own model. It's different than any other industry, which is really cool. But I just always ask myself and my clients how to make your breeding decisions, and usually it comes down to appearance and pedigree for the most part. So we have our breeding season. We weaned our fawns, we grouped our deer by AI sire, not by the cover buck. I'll come back and I have a table that shows what I'm talking about. We've increased our fat and left or dropped our protein. And then we've got our cedar in. And if we're going to work, if you're going to vaccinate, if you're going to do anything, deworming, I like to do that weaning. But if you haven't done that yet, you're in a bind. I wouldn't do any of that any later than cedar in. So once the cedars go in, I don't change anything with those does. They're until January. I wouldn't like anything to change from cedar in until January, when you can really let those pregnancies settle in. So we talk about the breeding season and why is it season is we all know that deer are short day breeders. And I don't know if you know, that's because of melatonin, which is what you're taking on in your sleep pills. But melatonin is what unlocks the reproductive cycle for your females and bucks and does. And so that's perceived by the eyes as life or the absence of it. The shorter the days get, the longer the nights, the more melatonin is produced by the brain. That melatonin unlocks the breeding cycle, and then those bucks and those does start to become fertile. You can artificially manipulate that a little bit with melatonin implants and get a jump start in the breeding season. Horses are the same way, and so everybody wants their foals born January 1st. That way they can be the oldest that they can possibly be for the next registration year. And so Thanksgiving, those guys like form those mares into barns and turn the lights off earlier and earlier in the day to try to simulate a shorter day. And it's also we can get more and more melatonin excreted by the brain. And then that unlocks everything else. And then we ask ourselves what drives our program. So I think that later in the year, regardless of where you live, you're going to have a better conception and more lawns on the ground. But then when you get down to like South Texas, the later that you breathe, the later those lawns are born in the spring, the hotter the ground temperatures are. So you're kind of fighting this battle, but if everybody's ready between the middle of November and Thanksgiving in the middle of December, I think that everyone will perform better as far as preparing babies on the ground, but then you're fighting ground temperatures in certain parts of the state. So just asking yourself why we do what we do or when we do what we do. Different types of AI or different types of reproduction. So artificial insemination is far and away the most common. Transcervical, I'm sure you're familiar with. The doe runs through the chute, you have a speculum and a probe, and you breed her transcervically. With semen, it can be frozen or fresh. It's very easy to do. It's very cost efficient. I think it's a great model for guys that have good bucks on their place. Collect those bucks, use fresh semen, get all your does bred the same day, take stress off of your bucks, and then you get your fawns on the ground relatively close together. Laparoscopic AI became really popular when semen prices started to go up. Obviously, you can split a straw on average 3 times. I think the record, Dr. Greg and Dr. Stan split a straw of Maxwell hardcore 11 times, about 21 babies. So that was when they were packing straws at 8 million cells for transcervical use. But yeah, you can split a straw on average nowadays 3 times. There's a little bit of risk because it's an anesthesia. It was under anesthesia and it's a surgery, but it's very efficient as far as semen conservation and success. Embryo transfer becoming more and more popular. I predict this will become even more popular as CWD regulations get tighter and tighter, and we get more and more data from Dr. Seagray's study about potential resistance and susceptibility. So if you have a doe that just lights up the test and appears to be genetically resistant or low susceptibility to CWD, then obviously you can flush her to a buck and you can get a whole bunch of embryos. Ideally, you can get more babies in the ground faster out of her genetics. So 2 different ways to embryo transfer conventionally and IVF. And the way I describe those is conventionally, we're asking that doe to make those embryos and then we're pulling them out of her. In vitro fertilization, we're making those embryos in the lab. So both of them require superovulation. You're asking that doe to give us as many eggs as she can. Conventionally, we're going to breed her, and those embryos are going to grow in her uterus for 7 or 8 days, and then we're going to flush them out. In vitro fertilization, we're going to go in before she comes in to eat, collect those eggs, fertilize them in a dish in the lab, and then be able to transfer or freeze them a week later. So different types of embryo transfer, different types of AI. It just depends on what your goals are and how you want to get there. So breeding week, we've decided if we're going to AI or if we're going to do any embryo transfer within our breeding groups. Get your semen early. Talk with your veterinarian about that. So like if I breed somewhere on a Monday, I want them to have that semen tank shipped to them. They're going to have to bring the shipper like Wednesday or Thursday the week before. Those shippers are good for 2 weeks. But I obviously don't want it to be delivered on Friday because if it doesn't make it on Friday, it gets stuck in the warehouse over the weekend and then we don't have semen Monday morning. So I told clients to get it there on Wednesday or so. Check your inventory if you're comfortable. At least check the inventory sheet. But don't transfer it around or move it. And then know your limits on size use. Our team knocks the whole thing out at once and just runs through them quickly. Other technicians do it differently. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong way. That's just the way that we operate. But know the limits on your health and your facilities. And then assign people jobs. You can have a whiteboard, and it sounds tedious, but say, hey, you're grouping, and just have that so that you're reading fun. A lot of guys haven't seen each other in a while, and they want to talk and stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that, but when we got deer asleep, we should focus on something else. And then organize by desired amount of cover buck. So this is what I call a bad lineup. So you got pin 1 and pin 2, and they just come to the trailer or to the veterinarian in any single order. But when I call a straw black cat, I want to use that straw as quickly as possible. So it doesn't make sense to have the first go right to black cat and the third go, and then all the way down here to the bottom. What I would like, and this is probably knocked out the whole group at once. So it's a lot easier to sort here once they're asleep than when they're awake. So knock the whole pin out. Bring me all 3 black cats first, bring me the pony boys second, and the gunslingers third, and that way the scheme is stopped for as short a time as possible. And then the biggest thing, if you notice over here, all of pin 1 goes back to the same cover buck, and all of pin 2 goes back to the same cover buck. It's really stressful when you change the groups and the pins that they live in. So let's say 70% is our target on the AI bird rate. That means only 30% of the doe are going to be bred by the cover buck. But we talked to a lot of guys, and they want the deer to go to this specific cover buck to get bred by him if she doesn't take the AI. Well, you're really catering to the 30% instead of the 70%. And so that's why I said have your breeding groups and your cover buck situated early. Don't send doe to different pins just so they can do the different cover buck after we breed them. Have all that set up so that there's no new pecking order established or no new stressors on these deer once we breed them. And so that's what I think that a well-organized, well-thought-out breeding plan looks like. All the deer come from the same pen, they go back to the same pen with the same buck, and they're brought in order so that really expensive semen that you buy isn't thawed for very long. And then we talk about AI efficiency, and everyone always talks about frame rate, but it should go one step further. We should be talking about fawns per doe, because it can be a big difference. And so if we look here, we mapped out how many singles, twins, trips, and quads we had. We bred 61 does, 47 of them, so we had 77% frame rate here, which I think anyone would be happy with the 77% frame rate. But then you add up all the fawns, and you see that we got 154 fawns out of the original 61 that we attempted to breed, so we have a 1.54 fawns per doe. You can imagine that if we get 47 of those doe, we still got 47 pregnant. We still have 77% pregnant rate, but if each doe only gave a single, then we have 47 fawns divided by 60, and so now we don't even have a fawn to doe ratio of 1, we're below that. And so fawn per doe is really important, especially when you go to think about your money. So let's say that we did 50 doe on ranch A and 50 doe on ranch B. When we did the math, we came out to 1.3 fawns at A and 1.7. So to multiply those out, that means we had 67 total fawns out of the 50 that we AI versus 85. And say, I don't know what the value is, you can put it in, but say that that's a $2,500 fawn is what you're thinking you could get for it when you could sell it. That's a difference of $50,000 when you're really just talking about 4 cents of the dozen. Does that make sense? So when you're talking about little changes that you can do to not necessarily affect your frame rate, but affect your fawns per doe, it can be a big draft. That's roughly $1,000 lost per doe that when you go back and look at the difference between a 1.3 and a 1.7 fawns per doe ratio. So I think 1.5 should be your standard. That's what I tell people to expect if everything's working. If it's above that, that means everybody did a fantastic job that day and year. If you're below that, then we need to go back and do some troubleshooting. But yeah, it's a bit, again, you could have the exact same rate on those 2 farms, but it all comes down to how many farms you actually got on the ground out of your AI babies. They can make a big difference. So post-breeding, when I leave, don't disturb the deer. Be careful if you're treating them. Call me if something gets sick and you want to treat it, because there are different antibiotics that can be damaging to the pregnancy. Keep them in the same groups. Please don't move them after we breed them, just so they can go to a different cover buck. I turn the cover bucks out roughly 2 weeks, 2 days. That gives the bug enough time to get situated in the pen and not miss anything that's going to cycle for 21 days after we AI. But again, don't run your AI program with a cover buck, because your money that you spend is on the AI, and that's what we should be focusing on. Again, buck collections, I think they're better both you can run through the facility. You can read ponds post-breeding. A lot of people were doing that last year using set sealing, just trying to get more males in the ground to the stock market. So the only problem breeding ponds late, like in January, is that's going to be an August pond, which isn't a huge problem other than we talked about how hard it is to breed two. So you think about that fawn coming early and having a baby in August, you got to win that baby early if you want that fawn, if you want that doe to have a chance of getting pregnant to AI that fall. So a lot of times I see these guys, they get babies on the ground, that's great, but it's really, really challenging to get those doe pregnant for a second time to AI that same year. And then nutritional planning for the last trimester. Because at this point, post-breeding, we're December, January, February, move into that last trimester and get everything ready. Again, we're going to increase that protein, offering as good a day as we can get them. And then I would encourage people to look into ways of using a loose mineral with the toxicity established in. So, then you got fawn season, and that's just crazy. So, that's about it. Any questions on repro? Comments or concerns or things you've seen work or things yet? Yes, ma'am?
You said something about certain antibiotics not to use after they've been bred. Well, which antibiotics do you suggest not using after they're bred?
Tetracyclines and Baytril. I don't use tetracyclines for the first 2 months, Baytril for the first 2 months. You can't use some, like your white wonders. That's why I try to work on early. But like penicillins are safe, vaccinations, those are valvases, bacteria, cause abortions, tetracyclines and Baytril can cause fetal growth problems and inflammation in their born.
What about hormones in the feed?
It's a good question. The literature says that but there's a different dose that the oral dose is going to, therapeutic level is going to be different than a big dose. So I haven't had problems with guys on that. In reality, I think they said that the only problem that you could see is yellow teeth, which we really don't care about. But I think you're probably fine with the feed grade additive. Yeah, so next, the first trimester, next by itself won't abort, but I wouldn't flirt with that. I just don't even know if it's after. In the middle and the last trimester, Dex will abort by itself. You really need a little life stretch to make it in the first trimester to abort as well. But yeah, that's what the rules are, but you can afford it with Dex for sure. So, yeah, anytime you have something that you're trying to treat for pain or inflammation, if you're in pregnancy, they want to go to ketamine. There's meloxicam, which is a feed grade NSAID that you can put with deer if you can get them to eat like that. But yeah, I stay away from Dex from now until, from the bucks. I have to be careful even now using Dex because the sperm cycle on a buck is 60 days, so if you knock that out, you don't know what that timeline is going to be with if you use Dex right now. And then for the doe, yeah, from now until flying, I'm really careful when I use Dex because Dex is really, really hard on reproduction. I try to, after the sunrise, I abandon my fertility. Anything else? We'll take a quick break. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 11:30. We'll run through antibiotics and then we'll get you out of here for lunch so that y'all have to. I never just really got for lunch, so I'm not expecting anybody else to. Yeah.
Kind of just like this little bit. Yeah. So it's like an hour away from Greg, so. He's in Catula. It's stinking hot, man, gosh. Yeah. He is super hot. Is Paul here? No, he's supposed to be in What do we got? Yeah. Yeah. Good. We should get that. I'm gonna use our potty. I wasn't registered. Oh no, I was gonna get the phone out. So like. You signed in? It was my kid.
Keep me abreast of all the talk. I'm trying to put us out there. He's gonna call. I thought he was gonna talk about that today. Where is it? You're gonna stay here.
If it was me, I would, like, right now, I would have them on like the 16.4. And I'm for being less of the 16.8. I've been in some places where they're on a 16.8 and they're on a free choice scheme where they literally can't get any nutrition. But if you're hand feeding and you know how much they're eating right now, you can always just up that when it comes time for AI. The problem is I've been in places that are, so that's my biggest concern is when you come to AI, we're going to push them on the nutrition to get that extra popular to get it more babies. And so they should be, if you want to, I'll just pull back a little bit on the 16 because they'll need to be eating as much right now as they were when it was sponsored by doctors. So you could just leave it less.
Well, trying to fit your softball on there, the person who gets this is what I try to say. They keep it on 60 days or something like that. The problem I see is they pull the balls off and then the trash, so cut back to this one. Circle back. We don't expect it back. No, I left last night. Well, I tried to do the same for what they say. I'll try to cut back. No, we left last night. 16 forward. So they're going to start trying to
gotta be in the bottom.
It depends what the binder is and what kind of,
That's good.
So is it breaking down that a little bit?
Yep.
What's that going to do?
Like what Dr. Andy said, it really helps with your udder problems because they'll dry out on milk. And you won't have a lot of udder problems after you eat. And then it also, yeah, and then it also, those ovaries have to get conditioned with the vacuum before they have to get a little bit on for those ovaries. And if you're already on a high fat ration, then you can't condition those ovaries. So you have to have that upward slope of nutrition. And so
you want to break it down a little bit?
yeah, and it's a lot of coordinated stuff with your feedback, but they should be on a high fat ration, high protein with a pond to get your, but then I slowly want guys to start back to go to at the end of one season, they don't want to help and it works.
Oh, okay.
I saw a lot of problems last year.
That's a great product. I said, look, I'm not trying to say anything. It's not about who makes it. I said, is it right? It is. There's good times and bad times to use this.
I like it.
So yeah, Aaron said that.
The problem is, it's all about marketing. And this is the time when people are doing intuitions, because this is when the up. And people all want to see skinny double, and that's not what we want for. Get offended when we tell them that. So, yeah, but that's what you want. But of course, those spawns will start eating more pellets and more hay. Look, you still use Red, you use your 16-4, but I'm not saying anything about Red.
Where's the closest restaurant?
I said that quietly, but I think that,
Correct me if I'm wrong, but they're really looking for some fire, aren't they?
yeah,
They're like that fire because they're connected by it, so they've got a higher fiber in their direction.
Well, there's different fiber levels and different trees. But you can't take the fiber and get out of their quality.
Yeah, and of course they run it,
I got some guys that they feed hay 60 days before spawning and 60 days after. And then they feed 60 days before breeding and after.
Well, why won't you feed it all the time?
Why wouldn't you?
Well,
They don't need it.
they don't need it. They won't go home until it's
No, I'm talking about feed hay. Oh, no, they eat hay year round, but you can, like there's certain times of year where all they need is hay. You don't have to feed them anything other than good hay. Yeah, I think it's sad that we're just not discovering, or at least me, and the actual sad part is that they only farm about 30,000 acres, but the print, I think people, they go in and Florida, it's a learning, doesn't have that. No, so you don't have like active population. That's the, yeah, peanut day, he got mad at me, he said, this is so much more expensive. And I said, "Because, oh, you're not offering, so there's yeah, peanut day is on road, that's
The port is
that's the biggest, the forage peanut, they grow about 30,000 acres in Florida, and that's about it.
they're very good about that. They just port.
They made I think it was A&M, made
Where's that at?
made they call it like latitude 45. Because it's supposed to be able to grow basically at the level of Dallas. But, it's great because you know, like, a bunch of peanuts down in Pearsall area, in West Texas, grows a bunch of peanuts, and I would figure that people would go out there too. Yeah, that's a way to yeah, that's just Greg. They laid down a bunch of forage peanuts on top of it. And it rained, it's like a crazy. He said
those things?
All right, we'll go ahead and talk about antibiotics for a little bit because we're all deer farmers, which means we all have sick deer. And so I think that there's a lot that we can learn and talk about antibiotics. I've done this before and got good feedback, and so I just keep kind of updated. But my goal is to just tell you how I approach antibiotics and what I think about whenever people call me and I'm helping them make decisions. But antibiotics in reality are pretty new. They weren't discovered until 1928. Alexander Fleming was a scientist, known for being kind of messy. Went on vacation, came back, there was something wrong in his lab. They noticed that there was a ring around this growth that there didn't have any growth, and he thought that was interesting. And so, lo and behold, that's where they ended up getting penicillin from. He accidentally discovered it from a mess in his lab. And Muhammad Ali said it better that if they can make penicillin out of moldy bread, surely they can make something out of you. So if you've ever run down about yourself, just go read some Muhammad Ali quotes. But to show you how important that was, a lot of people credit penicillin with giving the Allies a victory in World War I. There was just a lot of stuff that people were, World War II. A lot of stuff that people were dying from before penicillin got discovered. They realized how impactful that was for bacterial infections, and so that got to the Allies in the war, and a lot of people will credit that with helping us win. And so yeah, before penicillin, they said death was an everyday occurrence, and you can just imagine if we didn't have antibiotics, what they are metabolized, you can imagine how much more it would be if you didn't have it. So again, my goal today is just to tell you try to explain how I was taught antibiotics, and then try to teach you how I think about antibiotics so that we can make more informed decisions that ultimately save more deer and save your money and time. So I think this is in your sheet. I can email that, look like a copy, but I can email it to you if you want. I have my clients shrink this down, laminate it, take it to the stock of your garden, put it in your Ranger, so that you can look at it and help you guys make decisions whenever you're working. But what I've done here is, you've got the fancy drug name on the left, the trade name with a sulfide next to it, time of activity, whether it's long or short acting, volume, whether it's small or large volume, really whether it's dartable or not dartable, what it's good for, and then what it's not good for. So I try to put all of that in one area so that you can sit there and look at it and try to help make some informed decisions when you're on the farm. And so before we even pick an antibiotic, we need to understand what we're treating before we figure out how we're going to treat it, because it might not even need an antibiotic. We need to talk about regular keeping because there will be a day, I think it's already happening on some farms, where Draxxin doesn't work anymore because we use it for everything by default because it's easily dartable. We're going to talk about how we classify antibiotics, and then we're going to talk about each of those antibiotic families to try to explain the differences between them. So first thing is, do we need an antibiotic or understand what we're treating? The two things that really jump out to me are lameness. I think a lot of times lameness may not necessarily be a bacterial problem. It could be an injury. It could be a foreign body. They could have a mesquite stored stuck in their foot, which doesn't matter how many darts you hit them with. If that thorn is still in there, they're going to still be lame. You got to knock them down and do an inspection and figure out what's going on. Or it could be EHD, which again isn't really something that we can treat lameness with a dart if it's EHD. But just understanding what's going on. What type of infection is it? We talk about antibiotics and we act like they fix everything, but really, if you look at the name, antibiotics, they're only good for bacterial infections. They don't treat viruses, so we can't treat EHD with an antibiotic. We can treat some of the cosigns of it or subsequent infections, but they don't work against fungal, and only on one exception do they work against like cortisol or bacteria, things like that. So we need to understand where in the body the problem is, because certainly like if we talk about neurologic diseases, very few drugs can like penetrate the brain or the spinal cord. Luckily for us in the industry, almost all of them get to the lungs. But just understanding where in the body the problem is going to affect what drug we pick. How long is it there, and just the overall big picture. Big picture meaning like, what's this deer doing right now? Is it pregnant? This is some of those things that we might need to know. Record keeping, again, I have my clients print this off and laminate it. And you can carry a dry erase marker around in your Ranger. And so if you treat something, you can jot all of this down with a dry erase marker, take a picture of it on your phone, and email it to yourself or someone that's doing record keeping, and wipe that off and do it again for them. So you can do all of your record keeping with just one laminated sheet and a dry erase marker. But just some things we need to think about today, the NYD within clinical signs, when we talk about that in veterinary medicine, we talk about temperature, pulse, and respiration rate. We might not be able to get the temperature or the pulse, but you can definitely sit there and count the breaths and understand how fast that animal is breathing, or is it breathing faster than it should be, is it more forceful than it should be. And then we're, obviously we want to put down what drug we gave it, how much, how it was given, and then I always have my clients establish a recheck date or a retreatment number. So, I think about racing deer like I think about golf. And so if you think about the hole on a golf course, I think about that like a disease that we're trying to treat in deer. So I get on the tee box and my job is to get my ball in the hole as close as possible. You're in your deer pins and your job is to get rid of that disease as quickly as possible. But there's a lot of different clubs that I will use depending on what kind of situation I'm in. I'm not going to use my pitching wedge off of the drive off the tee box, and I'm not going to use my 7-iron when I'm putting. Like there's a specific club designed for a specific purpose, depending on what situation you're in. And it's the same with antibiotics. That's not to say that you can't play like 10 cup and do the whole course with your 7-iron. You can, it's just not the most efficient way. And so when we're talking about how expensive the dart or the Draxxin is, or how precious time is when you're working with these animals, we should be as efficient as possible, and it's understanding what each of those clubs in your bag, if you will, is designed to do. And so we talk about these families, and they're categorized based on different things, mode of action and how they work, what they actually do to the bugs. Spectrum of activity is what type of bugs they work really well against. Tissue distribution, again, is where those drugs penetrate well in the body. Water versus liquid soluble is a fancy way of saying how well these things penetrate membranes or abscesses, basically joints, and like I said, the neurologic system are really tough barriers that not a lot of drugs get too well. And then static versus idle. Static meaning they hold the infection at bay and let the immune system kind of take over, and then silent meaning they actually kill the organism independent of the immune system. So a lot of people equate that with good versus better, and that's not really the case. I'll explain the differences. Mode of action, this is what these drugs actually do to the bacteria. Most of them either damage the cell wall or damage the cell DNA. And that's all good and well, except when we talk about mycoplasma, which is a nasty respiratory infection that's fast-acting, fast-killing, and fast-spreading. But mycoplasma doesn't have a cell wall. So obviously, if mycoplasma doesn't have a cell wall, we can't use any of our penicillins or C because those drugs target the cell wall. So again, just knowing what kind of golf bug we're going to use, you can't pick a drug that impacts the cell wall if you're fighting a bug that doesn't have one. So people say, how do I know that mycoplasma? Well, I encourage people to take samples periodically and send them to the lab to culture out your pneumonias that die. But just a quick tip, anytime you see signs of pneumonia, and either swollen joints or lameness or a dropped ear, mycoplasma is going to affect the ear. So a lot of times you'll see a deer or a calf with a dropped ear and a pneumonia. Mycoplasma is the first thing I think about. And so that just means we're not going to use penicillin or XC or any of our white antibiotics. Spectrum of activity. We classify the bugs based on the structure of their cell wall, and that affects what antibiotics are susceptible or resistant to. And lucky for us, lung pathogens are all pretty much the same. Gut pathogens tend to be the same. Skin are mixed, but they're pretty susceptible to stuff we work with. And so, luckily, bugs that infect different parts of the body tend to act the same, which means they're usually all affected equally by the same drug. And then we have anaerobic versus aerobic. Aerobic bugs thrive in oxygen-rich environments, and anaerobic without oxygen thrive in oxygen-poor environments. So anything that's in an abscess, if you think about an abscess, it's a wall-off environment with no oxygen, and those are all your anaerobic bugs. And so a lot of times the best treatment for an abscess is to open it because that lets oxygen in. Those that bugs don't thrive on that environment, and that's a good first line of defense. Bacteria, Fuso is an anaerobic bacteria that forms abscesses and smells. Clostridiums like tetanus and those things. That's why whenever you ban calves or stuff, you're supposed to give them the tetanus because that forms of, when you ban something, that forms of oxygen-free environment in the testicles that can really get affected with vinegar clostridium. So not all antibiotics are useful against anaerobes, and not all of them are equally effective against the anaerobes. So we just have to understand the biggest thing for me is if it's in an abscess or if it smells bad, that's an anaerobic bacteria. And that chart will tell you which ones are. History of distribution. Lungs, almost all of these drugs get to the lungs while they stay there. The GI tract, I recommend oral drugs if we're going to be trying to treat a GI disease. Actually, I take management first for GI problems and then an antibiotic if that doesn't work. Skin, pretty much all of these drugs get to the skin well and are effective. The joints, probably only your macrolides, which is like Draxxin, all your Draxxins, your Prevo, Microzyl, and then Newflor, all do really, really well for joints. And then your blood-brain barrier, so if you're talking about a neurologic problem, Polylex, which is ampicillin, or Baytril and Newflor are the only 3 drugs that I recommend. And I'm not even supposed to recommend Baytril unless it's a respiratory disease, but scientifically, those are the only ones that cross the blood-brain barrier reliably. And so if you have a stabbing ear or an antler infection, those are the drugs that I love to, because those antler bases are right there on the brain. And so if I'm messing with those, then I pick a drug that crosses the blood-brain barrier. Water versus liquid soluble, again, that's just a fancy way of telling you what drug passed through those membranes. So obviously your penicillins and all the drugs that I didn't mention on the last slide are water soluble, and they don't penetrate through the tough barrier very easily. The lipid soluble ones pass through those membranes very easily and effectively, and that's why we talk about drugs that penetrate the CNS or the joints and abscesses well. Static versus idle, again, I was hesitant to even put this in there because it sounds like if something kills a bacteria, it's a lot better than when it doesn't. And it's not the case because Draxxin is a static drug. Newflor is my favorite drug. We're allowed to have favorites, and it's static. But when you think about Supradex or compounded dex, high doses of dexamethasone, those are going to be immunosuppressive. And so if we're wiping out the immune system with the high dose of steroids, in my mind it makes sense to pick a silent drug to pair with that because the immune system's not going to be able to take over that infection like we want it to. Same with fawns. Fawns don't have a robust immune system, so if I can safely use a silent drug in a fawn, I will. And then CNS, if this was a dog, that'd be easy to use Baytril for your CNS diseases. Legally, if it's a respiratory, or if it's a CNS disease here, I'd say we use Newflor, which is a static drug, but just because of the limitations of the FDA, we have our hands tied when it comes to recommendations on some new antibiotics. This is a big one for me because it gets really confusing when you're talking to clients on the phone or just some different language. So dosage is a rate just like mileage. So it's a unit of weight over a body weight. And so it's always given in medicine as milligrams per kilogram or sometimes cc's per pound or cc's per pound. And then your dose is the actual amount of drug that animal is getting. And so if your dosage of Draxxin is 1.1 cc's per 100 and you got 200 pound buck you're going to start, the dose of that buck is 2.2 cc's. Does that make sense? So it's just the HED. There's a difference between the dose of the dosage. And then your volume, I'm sorry, that, I misspoke. Your dose would be the amount of milligrams that's in that Jackson amount. Your volume is the 2.2. And so the easiest example is, it's not an antibiotic, but dexamethasone. So say you have 24 milligram mixed per mil or 96 mg per mil super dex. So you have a 100-pound deer. The dosage is 1 milligram per pound. So the dose that deer is going to get is going to be 100 milligrams of dexamethasone. So same dosage, same dose. The only difference is the concentration of the drug, so the volume is going to be different. If you have 24 mg per mil, you're going to give that deer 4 cc's. And if you have 96 mg per mil, it's going to get 1 cc. So does that make sense that that deer is getting the same exact dose of drug? It's just a different volume because of how it's concentrated. And so I have people call me and they say that my friend's crazy because he's got 96 mg per mil dex. And I said, well, he's not crazy, he's just giving it a smaller volume. It's getting the same amount that the 24 mg or the 48, you just change the size of dart that you're going to use. So it's the same with antibiotics. But again, dosage is the rate, dose is the actual amount of the drug on a milligram basis, and then volume is the actual amount of medication that you're going to put in the dart or the syringe. So we're going to move into the classes of antibiotics. So cephalosporins, or how I've broken up these slides. So you have your family name at the top. The first line is the trade name drugs that you'll be familiar with. I bolded the ones that I think are really pertainable to the deer industry. And then I've told you how long they are, what size volume they are, if they're lipid soluble, water soluble, static soluble, and then what they're not doing. At the bottom here, I've listed out what they're actually labeled for legally, and then I've bolded which ones I think they work well for. So we have cephalosporins, the one that we're going to use in the deer industry, far above what anything else is exceed. We also have Maxell and XNL, but those are short-acting drugs every 24 hours, versus Exceed, it's a longer-acting drug. It's a small one. You can dart Exceed, especially if you cut it with a little bit of water, but you can dart it. And so that's how I look at drug choices too, is I'm always looking for alternatives to Draxxin, because I'm scared of the day that Draxxin is not going to work anymore. So you can dart Exceed. It's water-soluble, meaning it doesn't have terrific penetration into those really hard to get places. And it attacks the cell wall. So when we suspect mycoplasma, we're not going to use any of these drugs. It's not great against anaerobes, so if you have an abscess or a smelling infection, I'm not going to go for one of these. But it is really good for respiratory disease, mastitis, and skin. And it's labeled for CNS, but I think that there's better options. So this is a great one for respiratory and anything that's a skin problem. I like this. And then it gets
What's CNS?
central nervous system. Thank you, sir. So the penicillins, this is the original group of drugs. Cephalosporins are like a penicillin, but again, this is, I call them the right antibiotics because they all act fairly similar. Penicillin is great. The only problem with it for deer is it's an every 24-hour drug, and I really don't know that I've ever recommended someone not giving penicillin for at least 5 days in a row or something. So that's the only downside to the deer industry, is it's a pretty hands-on drug. Polyflex, which is ampicillin, comes powdered, so you can mix it to whatever strength concentration you want, so you can control that volume that you're getting, so you can dart Polyflex if you need to, but again, it's an every 24-hour. Same as cephalosporins, it attacks the cell wall, so you have to be mindful to suspect mycoplasma. This one's great against anaerobes, so it's probably my go-to for skin, even though it's an everyday thing, but it's great for smelling infections, it's great for skin. You can put it in the water if you're ever in mind. Potassium penicillin is a water-soluble penicillin, and then it's great for repro infections as well. So, but penicillins are my go-to for skin infections if you can handle the deer enough times. Macrolides, this is like the backbone of the deer industry. You have Draxxin, Zactin, Cerebromycin, and Thailand. These are great for mycoplasma. They're long-acting, small volume. I mean, they're they're really great drugs. The big thing here is, if you use one of these, you don't need to use any of the other ones. I see on Facebook threads where, they're giving 2 or 3 of these in combination. You only need one of them, and if it doesn't work, then the other ones aren't going to work either. And that's where record keeping comes into place, knowing when these drugs aren't working as well as we like to did. So, small volume, readily article. Tylenol is a really cool drug. It's a powder form of macrolide, so you can put it in the water if you're trying to treat like a whole pin, and you can't run them through the facility.
Can you do the Tylenol 200 that you get the bottle mixed in with their water?
I've always used the powder, but I don't know why it would just be a math calculation on being able to figure out how much to put in there. It's lipid soluble, so it gets to those really hard places. It's static, which we really don't care about unless we're maybe thinking about one. It gets all tissues really well, especially lungs, so it's my go-to for respiratory diseases, and it's really great for feet problems. Don't use them together. You don't need to, and one of them doesn't work, and the other ones aren't going to work either. Tetracyclines is probably like the second oldest family. I think they're really good because people don't use them as much anymore. But I really like them because they're super broad spectrum, they're relatively long acting. The biggest downside is that they're kind of moderate volume, so you probably wouldn't be able to guard any of these. But they're just a good all-around option. Really good for respiratory diseases and foot rot. And there's oral formulations too, obviously, your PDCTC, that's a tetracycline. And they get all tissues in the body really well, except they don't cross that blood-brain barrier, so we wouldn't ever use this for like a neurologic animal. Fluoroquinolones, which would be Baytril, is the most common. I'm also an advocate for Atrazine, because Atrazine is darkable because of the concentration of volume that you use. So again, if you have a respiratory disease, this is another tool that you can use in a dart that's not Draxxin. And so I don't know that Atrazine, it's very similar to Baytril. I don't know that it's maybe quite as effective as Baytril, but it's a new option other than Draxxin to treat your respiratory diseases. So honestly, I try to use anything I can first before Draxxin, just because I've got some problems with Draxxin doesn't seem to work anymore. It's kind of be a scary area. So it's great for respiratory disease, great against mycoplasma, it's great against gets the lungs well, increases the central nervous system. And be careful if you use this in really young animals because it can be really toxic to cartilage. I had a patient when I was in vet school, a lady overdosed her goat kit on Baytril and all of the joints fused like this. It's like they just permanently solidified like this because of overdose on Baytril. So for that, I'm really cautious about Baytril when I'm dealing with young animals. Sulfas, this is like your outline, sulfur-dimethoxin. It's the only antibiotic we talk about that's also effective against coccidia, which is in a bacteria. But, something we could also consider for Buso, you can feed it orally, or if you go IV, but you can't dart this because it can't go in the tissue. It has to go either in the gut or in the vein. It's really good for showers every week, even if it's a bacterial problem. Always use it with thiamine. Anytime I give something orally, I always follow it up with thiamine. Thiamine is something that is created by the bugs in the gut that's needed for brain health. So I don't know if you're familiar with polio, but polio in the brain is just a result of a lack of thiamine. And so if we wipe out thiamine production in the gut with antibiotics, then we can have a problem with polio. And we did this polio is regularly corrected with thiamine, but anytime I mess with the gut in an animal, I give them thiamine as well. So 2,000 milligrams in the muscle should cover you on that. Fluoroquinolones, Leucoid is my favorite drug. You just can't guard it, but it's anytime you dart an animal down and you can get your hands on it, I recommend Leucoid to pick up the case other than like grabbing for the bottle of Draxxin. It's long acting, it's pretty moderate volume, but it's thick like things. And it gets everywhere into the nervous system. It's very niclosamide, this is a oral drug that we use for scours. It looks like Kool-Aid, if you've seen it, it's a big drug. But you can use it for scours if you need it, that's necessary. Again, I would use thiamine as well. Same with aminoglycosides. In food producing animals, aminoglycoside or aminomycin can only be given orally. Again, if we deem that it's necessary for scours, we can also follow up with thiamine as we can give them. So this is my general, I've never talked to you, but these are like my go-tos. Obviously, it's farm specific. If something's not working at your farm, we would change this list. But if you just ask me a question, you have to rank my favorite basketball players, if you will. Like this is, if we're talking about pneumonia, I think about macrolides, and I think about Atkinson. Macrolides being your Draxons. I do say Draxon for respiratory only at this point. So with a suspect pneumonia, Draxon I go to. If that doesn't work, then I'm thinking about Atkinson because I can guard it. And then third is Baytril. I'm sorry, see, the reason I have C third is in case that's a mycoplasma problem. I don't want my first line of defense to be a drug that doesn't cover mycoplasma. So that's my order. For skin wounds, I like Exceed or penicillin. For Fuso and foot rot, I really think that you need to knock those animals down, open up the abscess, check out the feet, why is it laying, make sure that you don't have any mosquito thorns or an injury. But I like Luflor first for feet, and then your macrolides are a good second choice if you don't have any more. For neurological, Luflor is my favorite. It just does a really good job. You can use Baytril if you're in a bind. But I think Luflor does a really good job. And then for scours, I always ask about management problems first. If we decide it's not a management problem and it truly is a bacterial problem, then we go with oral antibiotics, which would be any of the ones in the sulfathione or aminomycin or spectacard. This was just an example about Thailand because I had a really bad respiratory outbreak. Those had bonds out there, so you can't run them into the facility. And so this is how we figured out. Basically, you put a tub of Thailand in a 2 gallon. I told them to get a gas tank to clean the new. Put the still water in there, mix up the Thailand, and then basically you take a Gatorade bottle of that mixture for 50 gallons of water drop. And that's a pretty rough calculation, and you can do that for 5 to 7 days. So turn your water drops so they're not automatic. You know how much they're drinking, but that's a rough calculation on how we figured out if you can treat a bunch of things with this Thailand.
How often do you treat with Tylenol? 5 days, right?
5 days in a row.
So it's not a one-time treatment like you can with Sprego or anything like that?
No, because we want to make sure that they get a good care. Since we're not injecting it in them and we're just trusting that they actually drink it, we do 5 to 7 days.
So you can inject that one still?
Well, Thailand you can do, if it's the injectable, just once, but this is the oral in the water, I think for 5 to 7 days. And so they're playing together. This is what I try to encourage people to do, is to have a list like what we just talked about. Talk with your pen managers, with your owners, with your interns. Have a plan for pneumonia. What are we going to use the first day? What are we going to use the second drug? So, I should have put this on there. If y'all want to write this down, I can run through it. So, Exceed, I give 3 days of I get 3 days life of action for Exceed. Penicillins are every 24 hours. All of your macrolides, I give a week of activity. Tetracyclines, I give 4 days. Baytril and Atkinson, I give about a week. Your sulfas are 24-hour drugs. And for Luflor, I give a week. So those are rough estimates, but the shortest respiratory drug that I mentioned was Exceed, and that's a 3-day drug. So if you notice on this slide,
Yes.
I treat them on day 1, and I don't treat them again until day 3.
I'm sorry.
If they're
I
better,
said
I leave them alone.
we're-
If they're the same, I treat them again with the same or a different drug. And obviously, the words are a little different too. time I come back, it'll be on day 5 or day 6, so, a shot at Jackson at 8 a.m. this morning isn't gonna save that deer, then a shot at Jackson at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning is not gonna save it either, so, save your darts, save your money, and let give the deer time to work, but, I go out on it every third day regimen when I'm following up and deciding whether, I check it more than that, but if I'm making a decision on whether I need to retreat something, I go like that every 3 days. Have a plan for foot rot, have a plan for scour, lumpy jaw. Here's your table again, just to wrap things up. And that's about it. Any questions about antibiotics or anything else?
So I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any way you can recognize mycoplasma pneumonia? Just in case you see or something?
Without culturing it, the biggest thing would be if you have signs of pneumonia, and you have either like swollen joints or like a drop ear or a head tilt. So if it's just pneumonia in itself and it's not, doesn't seem overly aggressive, you're probably okay. But like I called a guy the other day and, or a guy called me in the video and this girl had snot pouring out of her nose and her head was tilted like this and she was kind of walking and so we talked about the I don't know for sure if that was mycoplasma, but based on how the bug acts, that was my first guess. And so I said, don't use Exceed. But and then you can see swollen joints. For whatever reason, mycoplasma settles in the joints. So if you see swollen joints and pneumonia at the same time, I think about mycoplasma. And you're not going to have, I would guess, I can't say never, but usually you're not going to have an isolated. Mycoplasma is so nasty and so aggressive that it's not typically going to be an isolated case. You're going to have a bunch of stuff. Yeah, that's why I used Thailand for that one guy because it was going through this hurt really fast and Thailand works against mycoplasma, but that's why I treated everybody because that's what I was worried about.
You know, mycoplasma drug also works for the other.
Yeah, I can't think of any of the drugs that work. Any of the respiratory drugs that work on mycoplasma work really well for all of the other respiratory drugs, all the respiratory drugs too. And if you wonder why any of the veterinarians don't pop up on Facebook groups and give recommendations, it's because it's illegal for us to. So we can't give those types of recommendations without having a vote. So that's why the veterinarians are usually quiet on them. But I get a ton of content to talk about based on reading Facebook group content. So. Anything else? Go ahead.
Have you ever seen a fawn just totally go like paralyzed, like not able to get up and walk and has a high fever and is basically immobile and stays immobile?
How old was the fawn?
About 6 weeks.
I would have expected it to be younger. That's like a really common sequela with like nasal infections and going to be septic. In 6 weeks, I don't have, that seems a little bit unusual for me for the pattern of the disease to be that late. But it was only on the bottle? Or was it on mom?
It was on the mom. We were able to just walk up to it and pick it up and never been able to walk again. It raised neck and it hurts back. It was just really weird.
Yeah, without seeing it and being able to, it's hard to tell, but I mean, if it had a really, really high fever and wasn't just, sometimes they can be malnourished or they can just be sick with like intestinal parasites and they happen to lay down in the sun and get a really high temperature that way. But if it was truly a high fever and not because it was just laying down in the sun, unable to move, then it would have obviously been something infectious. That's what people do, infectious. So
What would you recommend doing to something like that?
Fluids first.
Fluids, yes, definitely.
Fluids. And then I would have picked something broad spectrum, and safe for me. I probably would have, in that case, I probably would have gone for like Newport just because it's so broad spectrum and it brings the 9 for ponds. You could have done Exceed as well, because it's societal and safe. But yeah, I would have started with fluids, is what I would recommend if you were a client, and then a broad spectrum safe antibiotic.
Can deer get tetanus?
Oh yeah,
Serious. Could that have been tetanus maybe?
definitely could have been tetanus. If you're in South Texas,
Yes.
West Texas,
Stop.
yeah, it could have been tetanus for sure, or any of the other Clostridiums. I recommend giving a CD&T vaccine when they're born. I don't know that a lot of vaccines are effective in newborns, but there is some data to show that CD&T can be effective when we give it to newborns. So, yeah, if you put a tag in that thing's ear and you live in South Texas, there's a chance that they could have got tetanus for sure. In which case I would have used penicillin. Lots of it.
You can't get penicillin intravenous Virginia. It's gotta be orally or subcu. So you gotta get a original garden to be a man.
Especially the worst. Gives them worst give penicillin IV. They have like a full seizure for 5.
Would it give any benefit to give a potential tetanus spawn dexamethasone?
That farm's probably not gonna make it, so you can try everything. Realistically, but like 6 cc's, I think I used like 6 cc's per 100 on penicillin for tetanus. Get them in a dark stall, put cotton in their ears, because they're really, really sound sensitive and they're light sensitive. And fluids and bandaging because it's really painful. And I think in that case, it is an infection, but I think a lot of the fever comes from all of their muscles being so rigid and using so much energy that they get really happy with fluids. But yeah, if you're in South Texas, I would incorporate CDT into your vaccine program if you don't use it already.
Are you giving that orally challenge?
Wait, what?
You can give it orally the vaccine when they're babies.
Okay.
I had a cow tetanus in vet school. We had to cut a hole in her side and feed her tubes through a hole in her side for